Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Today we welcome Dr. David Decker to the show. Dr. Decker joined Franklin University as its president in 2007, and under his leadership, Franklin has focused on the demonstrable achievement of student outcomes, through which graduates are empowered to rise in their professions and to strengthen their contributions to their families, communities, employers. Dr. Decker is one of those rare individuals, has both a higher ed and a business background. He joins us today how he's applied his business background, namely the 4 Ps of marketing, to drive growth at Franklin by meeting the needs of graduates and businesses that hire them. And an interesting fact, during the pandemic, their minimum growth was 4%, and they're back at double-digit growth at this point. There's a great stat for you. Please welcome Dr. David Decker to Changing Higher Ed. David, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Likewise, sir. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. We were talking prior to coming on the air about how higher ed is really needing to think about itself as a business for the public good. And so before we get into that, share with our listeners a little bit of your background, if you would, please.
I went to school at Grinnell College in Grinnell, Iowa, got my undergraduate degree there and got my doctoral degree from the University of Kansas. And I was in college teaching for a number of years and then migrated into the world of business. I went back to school at the University of Pennsylvania, got my MBA from the Wharton School, and then I was in manufacturing for a number of years and became a president of a manufacturing company. Then I recycled again back into higher education to Youngstown State University to an endowed chair. I worked in New York, the New York Institute of Technology as a dean of business and a vice president of international academic programs. And since 2007, I've been at Franklin University in Columbus, Ohio as the president.
Oh, very good. So you've seen both sides of the fence.
I have.
So I was gonna make a smart remark about the University of Pennsylvania and a Wharton School and stuff, but it is a fabulous school. And it's interesting because Franklin was founded as a night school for people to gain their professional degrees.
That is true. Franklin University was originally founded as one of the YMCA schools of commerce. There was a movement in the late 19th century. The YMCA opened up, I think, 19 schools of commerce around the country, most of which subsequently evolved into institutions of higher education like Youngstown State University, Northeastern University, and a number of others. So Franklin was founded in that way and became independent in the 1960s of the YMCA and has been, it's a nonprofit independent institution, private, with a professional orientation. We've always had a professional orientation and always focused on part-time adult learners.
Mm-hmm. What we typically will call non-trad or non-traditional.
Yes.
So with that focus on the non-traditional students, you look at things a little bit differently. And of course, your business background would probably lend itself. One of the things I've talked about is being part of the talent supply chain.
Yes, that's exactly right. Franklin University is an institution that obviously we serve our students, but our students are employed by companies and by governmental organizations and nonprofits and so forth. And in many instances, those organizations are sponsoring, supporting, paying for the education of their employees through Franklin University. Not all, obviously, but in many instances. So we view it as part of our mission to provide a supply of highly educated, well-trained, and prepared management personnel for American business and for the nonprofit sector as well. So it does put us in a somewhat different position than a lot of traditional higher education, which of course serves traditional age students for a sort of broader endpoint.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also too, you've got some bragging rights. During the pandemic, you did very well.
That is true. Our institution operates in a segment of higher education as the part-time working adult segment, about roughly 3 million students of the total higher education tertiary sector in the United States. And in that segment had already gone largely online prior to the pandemic, and now it's virtually completely online. So we had a lot of online capabilities that served us very well during the pandemic and emerging from the pandemic. And so we were in positive growth territory throughout that period, and we're in double-digit growth territory now.
Wow. And I would guess that you've created strong liaisons, strong advisory groups to help you with your curriculum?
Absolutely. Each one of our academic programs, and that includes undergraduate, master's, and doctoral, is supported by a program advisory board consisting of practicing professionals in that subject. So if it's healthcare or if it's accounting or if it's criminal justice, we have program advisory board meets at least quarterly with the program chairs, faculty of the program to provide context and input on curricular developments, expectations of that profession so that they can be incorporated. And we are regularly revising our curriculum through an internal institute that we have that focuses on course development and course revisions. So we work very closely with community colleges, with corporations, with professional organizations. All of those are excellent sources of input about how to keep our programs current and directed towards the right ends.
Did I catch that right? That your program advisory boards, they meet multiple times during the year?
Oh, yes, at least quarterly. Yes.
Wow. For each program?
Yes.
Wow. And faculty are open to that kind of direction and ideas?
Well, the faculty run the whole system. Program chairs of individual programs have as part of their responsibility the recruitment and maintenance of the program advisory boards and the setting of the agendas for the meetings and the management of the meetings and communications with the members of the board. So it's all run by the faculty.
Wow, that is the way it should be done, I think.
I agree.
And so tell us a little bit about how your background in corporate America helped inform you in driving Franklin's growth.
Well, Franklin is a nonprofit university, and higher education, of course, as you said earlier, Drumm, is a public good. We all embrace that, acknowledge it, and celebrate that fact. And in fact, our higher education system in the United States is one of the powerful drivers of our economic success. So we all understand that. The intersection of business and higher education is a natural one because every enterprise has to sustain itself economically. We can't, have enterprises that are non-viable economically. They just don't last. So obviously, higher education institutions have to be sustainable, have to be self-sustaining. And in doing that, they have to apply the known principles of good economic management, good financial management, and good business thinking to the task. Now, that you don't want to go beyond that to say that profit then becomes the objective. Profit is not the objective. The objective is the professional and personal development of the students and of their employers and so forth. So we're not for profit, but we're not for loss either. You have to sustain yourself.
Oh, absolutely. It's just somebody told me a while back, it's the for-profit universities. It's just a tax. It's a tax mentality versus a nonprofit. Well, there's a little more than just a nuance with that, but profit loss, revenues, expenses, it's both the same. You've got to be in the black instead of in the red.
Absolutely, you do. And Drumm, one of the things that sort of obvious things about running a complex enterprise like a university is that there are models that exist in business thinking that can be readily applied, and you don't have to take everything to an extreme, but there's no reason not to use these very well-developed and sensible models to understand the enterprise and how to move forward. For example, take the 4Ps, the traditional 4Ps of marketing: product, price, place, and promotion. So we tend to look at these things maybe a little differently than traditional higher education institutions do. Let's take product, for example. Product is usually thought of in terms of content. So we say, well, okay, we have a program in French, or we have a program in theater, or we have a program in finance. And then when institutions say we're going to expand our program offerings, what they usually mean by that is adding another subject, like cybersecurity or healthcare or some new subject. And of course, that's all obviously true that academic programs have content, but applying the concept of product, the broad sort of thinking about product that you see in the business world, to academic programs means that in addition to content, there is also structure. The structure of academic programs are part of the product. So for example, transferability, the ability for students to transfer credits from one institution to another without losing credits. So articulation is a structural element of an academic program. Micro-credentials, the disaggregation of big program units into smaller units that are more aligned with the needs of industry, but then rearticulating them back into the degree programs so that they help students make progress towards a credential, is a structural element of the program, of academic programs. And of course, things like prior learning assessment, where you look at the whole range of credentials earned outside the academic world and how they integrate into an academic program. So these are all examples of looking at academic programs through a product prism that is broader than just content.
So, David, tell me about the other P's, because you've got product, you've got price. Sorry, I'm not a marketing.
Sure.
I'm not a marketing guy. So
yeah, product, price, place, and promotion.
Thank you.
So let's talk about price. So price is obviously a major feature of competitive posturing of the products. Higher education in the United States, by and large, thinks of price in a very self-absorbed way. So I'm talking about independent institutions now that don't receive subventions from the state treasuries. That's its own world. And there's pricing issues there too. But, independent institutions tend to think of what their costs are, and then what does their price have to be in order to sustain themselves at that cost level. And then they set a list price that is typically much higher than the price they know they're ultimately going to be able to charge. And then they discount off of that very heavily. I think that, if I can say, I think the Nakubo average discount is over 50% now. That's 55%. So it's a huge number. And so you have to, from our point of view, that is not the way we look at pricing. First of all, the idea that pricing is predominantly driven by your own needs is not a market view. There are fixed numbers out in the universe that relate to the pricing of academic programs that are completely unrelated to the needs of individual institutions. So, for example, $5,250 is a number. It's a fixed point in our universe. That is the amount of money that a corporation can deduct in 1 year for educational expenses for one employee and charge it as a business expense. $5,250. $7,395 is another fixed point in the universe. That is the maximum Pell Grant amount for 1 year for a Pell eligible student. And of course, zero is a fixed number out in our universe, because zero is the number that most students would like to pay for their education. So how then can you think of your pricing taking into account these fixed points in the universe and not just what your own needs are, or how much you would like to make, or how much you think you can extract from a certain student. As you know, there are these elaborate algorithms to figure out how much you should discount in order to maximize the probability the student will matriculate. No, we don't do any of that. We tend to look at the market structure and organize our pricing around what the market structure is.
Let me see if I've got this. You've gone out, you've taken a look at IRS guidelines, you've taken a look at Pell, you've taken a look at what students want to pay, and you've set your tuition at those rates or close to it, instead of saying, we're going to build all this, it's going to cost us X amount, et cetera. So you're backing into the structure that you need versus building the structure and saying, this is what it's going to cost.
Well, I would say that obviously we have to have a tuition rate. We have a tuition rate. So it's not as though we just don't have any fixed price that we put on our program. And we do, of course. What I would say is that rather than some undifferentiated discounting model based on statistical analysis of how independent students decide to go someplace, they're not so much numbers that we assign to programs as they are a way of looking at how students or employers or the organizations that sponsor and pay for many of our students look at the cost of the overall offer. So we don't dispense with a tuition rate. We have a tuition rate, obviously, but we try to align how we present the cost of our programs with numbers that are of importance to the students and also to their employers and their sponsors.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So when you're building a program, obviously you want to build it right, but you are looking at certain price points that this program, with all its infrastructure, everything else, needs to come in at so that you can still maintain a profit.
Yes, that's right.
Or positive revenues, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's surplus.
Same difference,
yeah.
Yes.
So price is much more complex, the way we look at it, I think, than the traditional way of just setting a high list price and then discounting down to wherever you think you can get students. If you want to look at the other elements of the 4 Ps, so you take place, for example. So place or distribution. Traditionally, Drumm, people have thought of place as, well, you have a main campus and then you have branch campuses. Or later on, they thought, well, you have face-to-face instruction and then you have online instruction. And of course, these things all interacted with one another, the branch campuses and the online and all that. But you could say that's a sort of general idea that people have had. And that, of course, those are still all true. But in the world we operate in, there's a whole range of additional distribution aspects or place aspects that are really powerful. The appearance of new intermediaries in the higher education space, especially in the last 10 years or so, has really complicated the task of getting our programs out to the student population. For example, you have gatekeepers like companies that serve as tuition reimbursement facilitators for corporations, and there's a number of them. For a fee, they manage the whole tuition reimbursement enterprise for large corporations. They act as gatekeepers, and so you have to determine what is your relationship with them going to be. There are content providers who are also lead generators. You have to figure out what your relationship with them is. We could have a whole conversation only about this subject, actually, the evolution of new platforms and new intermediaries in higher education in the last 10 years or so. You certainly have to be aware of that. And then as far as promotion goes, obviously the biggest revolutionary change in promotion for higher education has been the shift to digital advertising and digital communications. So that requires a lot of attention to detail and analytical framework to use effectively. You can waste money in digital just as easily as you can waste money in advertising on Monday Night Football.
Or Super Bowl commercials.
Exactly. So those are just some thoughts about how using a framework like the 4 Ps can help you at least recognize what are the structural changes occurring in the environment and how do those impact you have to present yourself to potential students.
So earlier on, we talked a bit about, and I'm thinking about place at this point. we talked a bit about how Franklin has moved from pre-COVID 80% online to 95% now. That's your place.
Yes, that's right. Place is usually thought of as how is it that whatever product you have is distributed to the final user. And in this case, that refers to the instrumentalities, the modalities that are used to transmit academic programs to the students who are taking them. So you have face-to-face instruction, you have branch campuses, you have online. And the reason I mentioned intermediaries is that you can have all of those methods of offering an academic program and still not get any students unless you are using the sort of intermediary structures that stand between you and the potential students.
Mm-hmm. And the promotion piece, for most institutions, that is challenging for them. They don't know how to promote their things. We've seen billboards, we've seen social media, et cetera. You guys at Franklin approach this differently through the relationships you've built.
Well, we do. I think that promotion is very often thought of primarily as advertising. And advertising is really only one element of promotion, but it is the one that most higher education institutions focus on as a way of attracting attention to their institution. And institutions spend a lot of time on what the messaging should be and what the outlets should be for their advertising. And of course, we do too. You have to do that to manage it properly. But there's a whole range of methods for communicating a message about your institution that have nothing to do with advertising. We have our relationships with community colleges. We have our Community College Alliance. We have hundreds of community colleges all over the United States that are our partners that we accept transfer credits from. We have articulation agreements with. Those community colleges represent credibility enhancers for Franklin University with their students. Because obviously, if you're a community college student and your community college says, we have an agreement with Franklin University and many students have gone to Franklin University and been successful, then you can't buy that kind of advertising. That provides immediate credibility. Same with a company. If you're on the approved list of a company's educational offerings, then the credibility of the employer transfers to you as an offer of academic programming. So I think we just try to be creative about the ways to get the message to our potential students. It's not that we don't use advertising. We do use advertising. We advertise a lot, but it's not the only method.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's really an important piece to all this. Advertising still works to some degree, but you've got, just to estimate, how many different articulation agreements do you have?
I'll give you an example. We have relationships with community colleges all over the United States, and we have evaluated the courses in their curricula so that we can tell students who apply to us from those institutions which courses we will take as transfer courses and where they fit into the baccalaureate program. And we have at this point evaluated and have in our database about 180,000 courses from almost 1,000 community colleges all over the United States that we are able to immediately, automatically inform a student if they present that class, that course, as having been successfully completed. We show them where it will fit in our curriculum automatically. So that's been, we've been doing that for 25 years, and that's how we got to 180,000. So we have intense focus on transferability and on articulation with our community college partners. We have a pretty well-developed pathway portal that their students can come through and get all kinds of information about baccalaureate possibilities. So we spend a lot of time on that. As a general rule, Drumm, about half of our students are what we call affiliated students. In other words, they come to us either from a community college or from an employer or from the military or from someone that we have an affiliation relationship with. Only about half of our students are unaffiliated.
Mm-hmm. And those transfer credits, I'm blown away with how many courses you have that transfer and you know exactly where. It is a testimony to the importance of doing these type of things and the ability to give a student who is applying or thinking about applying an answer very, very quickly.
Immediately, actually. As a general rule, community college students, if they're in our sort of network who present their transcript, and we can, in many instances, get their transcript electronically, even get it for them if they want, we can tell them right away what transfer credits they will receive, how that affects the time and cost of completion of not just one academic program, but we might say, look, if you go in business administration, it'll take you X amount of time and cost you Y amount of money to finish. But if you do accounting, it will cost you a different amount and take a different amount of time. Or if you do HR, so we can lay it all out for students on the front end.
Wow. That is amazing. I mean, that is looking at the transfer portal, the transfer process holistically and understanding what students need to be able to do this.
It is, Drumm. It's removing the friction points. The friction points that you and I come from a world where getting your transcript was a nightmare. You wound up, it's okay, I'm going to write to the registrar's office at a university that I went to 15 years ago and say when I went there, and then ask them if they will send it, and then they'll send it in a sealed envelope with a signature on the back, and then I'll take that personally into some office, and all that's all. We don't need to be doing that.
I remember our son was going into the Peace Corps, needed a transcript, and he went to the university that he went to, which was a 30-minute drive, went to the registrar's office, asked for it, and he says, oh, we can have that for you in 6 weeks. Like, come on, this is not thinking.
Right.
So ultimately, I called a friend of mine who just happened to the dean of the College of Business. And Dennis, can you work out? He had it that afternoon. It doesn't have to be that hard.
No, it doesn't.
So, well, David, this has been a fascinating conversation. It really reminds me of what a really wise man told me years ago. It's like when you go to business school, you've got different kinds of curriculum. You've got accounting, you've got economics, you've got operations, et cetera, et cetera. You're looking at business, the same business, through a different lens. You're doing that in looking at education through a different lens. It's not wrong, it's different, and it works very well for you. So kudos for what you've done there. I mean, you've been there for a long period of time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that, Drumm. We're pretty proud of what we do at Franklin. We have really great reviews from our students and from their employers, and that's what we're looking for.
And that's what distinguishes you, is that close ties to employers. Somebody coming to Franklin, they're going to be able to transfer credits in. They're going to be ready to hit the job market when they graduate, and even before.
That's right.
David, 3 takeaways for your fellow presidents and board members, please.
Well, one thing I would say as a takeaway is don't limit your thinking about what you are doing. And we go back to that product question. Don't limit your thinking about academic programs to just content. Expand it out and think, what are we actually talking about here? What are the attributes of the program offering that are of importance to students? So try to break out of the boxes that are naturally imposed by the academic world. The second thing I would say is fail fast. You try something and it's not working, discontinue and move on to the next thing. And don't spend a lot of time explaining why you were really right and it really would have worked if something else had. Those are all sort of wasted moments. And I guess the third thing would be that, what was it? President Reagan said, it's amazing how much you can get done if you're prepared to let others take the credit. So it's so easy just to give other people credit, and it produces such an immediate positive result. That would be my third takeaway.
Oh, those are great. Thank you so much. What's next for you?
Oh, I love it here. I feel like we are breaking new ground all the time, and a year from now, you and I can talk again, and you'll hear some of the things that we've done that I'm not prepared to share right now. But
I look forward to that. Let's put it on the calendar.
Very good.
So, David, thank you. It has been wonderful having you on the show. I look forward to the next time.
Thank you, Drumm. Nice to talk to you.
Likewise. Thanks for listening, and a special thank you to Dr. David Decker, president of Franklin University, and for his sharing with us how he has driven growth at his institution and can at yours by applying the 4 Ps of marketing to your campus. Join us next week when we welcome back one of my favorite guests, Dr. Philly Mantella, president of Grand Valley State University and founder of the REP4, that is, Rapid Education Prototyping Initiative, that's driving innovation across U.S. universities and colleges. Thanks again for listening. See you next week.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.